All right, guys, this one is on word meaning. So at first we have four terms that we want to be familiar with and able to provide examples of. So we'll just go through these. So the broadest and most general is a figurative language, where figurative language really just means you describe something by comparing it with something else. So we'll do a few examples of figurative language. The ocean danced in the moonlight would be considered figurative language. Cute as a button would be considered figurative language. And what everybody's mom has told them forever, I've told you a million times. Okay, those are all examples of figurative language. Okay, as we get a little bit more specific, simile, and then we're going to do metaphor here in a second. So lots of times people get simile and metaphor confused. Okay, so the key here is that simile uses the word like or as, right? That's what you're going to see. So if you see a comparison, right, so like as cute as a button that we just had up there, would be an example of a simile. Simile and metaphors are both used for comparison. So like another simile that there's a million of them, right? But as blind as a bat, right? So again, the word as or the word like, that's what we're looking for simile, and it's a comparison. Metaphor, also a comparison, but much more direct, right? So it'll draw a verbal picture, but you'll have word phrases like feeling blue, right? Right, you're comparing it to something else, but without the words like or as, right? Then you'll much more likely to see a metaphor. A couple other, you are what you eat is a metaphor. It's commonly used, and I've seen on tests before. It was a battlefield. So those are all different kind of metaphors. Okay, so there's those three. One more that you got to be familiar with. Text too small. There we go. Personification is the last one. Okay, and personification, pretty easy to remember if you just think that there's the word person, within the word, and personification is assigning the qualities of a person to something that isn't human. So an example that we used earlier that I have since erased was the ocean danced in the moonlight, right? So that it was an example of figurative language in a broad term, but is also an example of personification, right? And so what do we mean by that is, well, oceans can't actually dance, right? But people can, right? And so when you give the quality of a person to a thing that's not a person, that's personification. So that's a good example right there of personification is the ocean danced in the moonlight. Okay, and then outside of that is you'll have a bunch of questions in which you're tested on just being able to look into context and based on context be able to guess at what the word means. So this shows up in the vocabulary section as well, but we'll do an example here. So let's see. I'm sure he will remain obstinate, continue to oppose abortion. Okay. Okay, so with that one, so your question would be on the word obstinate, right? And so perhaps you know what that word means, and that's great. But as far as word meaning and vocabulary, what you're not really supposed to be doing, and what is really like a waste of time, is to memorize like the few hundred words that are like the most commonly used. What you really want to do is be able to learn words using context, right? And so you do that all the time in your life, right? Is if you know what all of the words mean except for obstinate, you could probably pretty accurately guess what it means. So if you kind of let's break it down to its pieces, I'm sure he will remain obstinate and continue to oppose abortion, right? So there's right, so he's opposing abortion. So there's, based on the writer, is there's two possibilities here at first, right? So one is that he's just being stubborn, right? And that the writer thinks that anybody who is opposing abortion is being stubborn, right? So that would be one answer choice, would be some word that's something like stubborn. And then the other one would be someone who uh, is, in the opposite sense, is maybe like morally obliged or something, uh, to continue to oppose abortion, like it's the right mindset, right? And so as you put those, as you kind of think of that, I'm sure he will remain stubborn and continue to oppose abortion. It makes, it doesn't mean that you agree with it or not. That doesn't matter for the purpose of this uh, this exam or any standardized exam, uh, right? Or I'm sure he will remain, you know, morally obliged to continue to oppose abortion. Either are possible. Stubborn seems to fit in a lot more, right? And that's kind of how you go about thinking about things like this. And that would be the answer, would be stubborn, or some other word that means something similar to stubborn. It would be a good answer for obstinate. Okay, so that is all the stuff on word meaning. So you need to know in general what figurative language means, more specifically the differences between simile and metaphor, right? Remembering that simile uses the words like or as for comparison. Metaphor is a more direct comparison. Personification assigns the qualities of a person to something that isn't human. We use the example, the ocean danced in the moonlight, and then considering context when trying to guess at word meanings.